Don't move. Close the doors. The gavel hadn't even fallen when the whisper turned to thunder in my chest. Daughter-in-law exposed at family gathering. Harsh words from daughter-in-law accused me in tears. The headline sounded theatrical, yet I could taste its salt. It was not a headline. It was my life, folded into one breathless moment under fluorescent lights, with faces I loved arranged like strangers and a truth I had carried sealed inside my bag. Silence kills a marriage, and silence strangles mothers too, when love is weaponized. Stay with me as we open a wound that heals into a lesson about boundaries, dignity, and choosing clarity over comfort. Milford County Courthouse smelled of wax and old paper. Morning light cut through tall windows and made dust look like snow. I wore a navy suit that still held the scent of cedar. Daniel sat 2 rows behind me, jaw tight. Lena, my daughter-in-law, dabbed her eyes with a folded tissue. A bailiff shifted near the door. In my purse lay a flat manila envelope, edges worn from sleepless fingers, and a single brass key that did not belong to any door in my house. Weeks earlier, the story had not been marble and echoes. It had been casserole dishes and condolence cards. After my husband died, Daniel insisted we not let the house swallow me. Lena brought flowers and efficient lists. She moved through rooms like a friendly breeze. She praised my garden. She pressed my hand at the sink. She told neighbors we were a team. I let that sentence warm me, even when her smile ended before it reached her eyes. Kindness arrived wearing comfort and carrying boxes. The boxes emptied and the comfort multiplied. Laundry folded itself. Mail sorted itself. Passwords became convenient. I told myself this was what families did when a chair went empty at the table. I told myself the tremor in my gut was just grief learning to speak a new language. I ignored the way Lena stood between me and my phone when it rang. A family gathering should knit you back together. Ours frayed. Lena planned a Sunday lunch. She curated invitations. She chose dishes I used to make with my mother. She set my dining table without asking where the linen lived. Between toasts, she told a charming story about elders who forget and the blessing of younger hands. Laughter floated. The story stuck to me like burrs after a walk through tall grass. I noticed small substitutions. A framed photo mistake. I stood at the kitchen sink and watched the maple throw shadows across the lawn. Lena walked in carrying lemons. She kissed my cheek. "We should talk about simplifying," she said. Her voice was soft. I tasted metal. I said we would. I said nothing else. Grief can fog a room, but fog is honest. Manipulation is not. I took out a notebook from my desk and wrote down dates. I wrote down amounts. I wrote down the time Lena started answering my calls. I tucked the notebook under the lining of my purse. That night, I placed a tiny camera among my books. It blinked once, like a sleepy firefly, and then learned to hold its breath. I am a mother and a retired bookkeeper. Columns steady me. Proof steadies me more. The camera watched hands that were not mine open drawers that were not hers. It watched a pen pause over paper as if mimicking prayer. It watched a phone call conducted in my name. It did not judge. It simply remembered. I sat alone at my table and listened to my own house explain itself back to me. A story is a house with many doors. Some you unlock, some you let others lock for you. I realized I had been handing over keys because it felt like love. The brass key in my purse gleamed like a small sun. It opened a safety deposit box Daniel did not know existed. Inside waited copies of statements, a timeline, and an affidavit signed by a doctor who had looked me in the eye and said, "You are competent." Competent is a quiet word. It rings like a bell when you are being called confused. In the courtroom, Lena's tissue whispered. Daniel's knuckles whitened. My heart slowed until it could hear itself. I stood. My name sounded steady when the clerk asked me to confirm it. I reached for the envelope that held months of dead weight and living truth. I felt the brass key press my palm. I saw the judge's gaze, clear and undecorated. There are moments when your life asks you to be the person you taught your child to become. If you have ever felt your reality rewritten by a gentle voice, You know the exact temperature of this air. You know the way hope can pretend to be help. You know the way doubt can dress up as duty. I looked at my son, then at the woman who he said living together would keep me safe. I nodded, though a part of me tightened. The foyer smelled of polish and flowers Lena had brought, bright lilies that seemed to take up too much space in the vase. Her smile widened as she placed a hand on my arm, but the touch cooled me instead of warming me. The dining room became the first stage. She admired my antique set, polished by my husband's hands, then suggested modern chairs for comfort. I resisted, but Daniel whispered that change might help me heal. That evening, while I visited my sister, the dining set disappeared. We donated it, Lena said with practiced kindness. You seemed sad when you looked at it. My chest clenched, but Daniel only nodded along. I swallowed silence, though the empty space screamed. Every Sunday after church, neighbors stopped by. Lena was always ready. She wrapped her arm around me, whispered to Mrs. Hall about how fragile I had become. My neighbors began looking at me as though my mind were fraying. I wanted to protest, but words stuck like stones in my throat. The worst part was Daniel's silence. He didn't see his wife's lines drawn carefully in the dust of our home, redrawing the story of my decline. Mail that used to rest on my desk now vanished into Lena's tidy piles. She handled bills for convenience. She glanced at my checkbook with sympathy and said, "You shouldn't worry about numbers anymore." Her tone was sweet, but her eyes sparked when I mentioned Robert's insurance and savings. I noticed that spark and tucked it away. Perhaps I was paranoid. Perhaps grief clouded judgment. Yet even grief couldn't erase 35 years of bookkeeping discipline. I let her carry the groceries. I let her answer the phone. I let her tell friends I wasn't well enough for bridge. Isolation crept like ivy across the walls, green and unstoppable. Still, I pretended it was care. My heart told me to trust my son's wife. My instincts whispered a warning. Whispers are easy to ignore when you long for company. The truth is, betrayal does not announce itself with fire. It enters softly, with flowers in hand and promises on its lips. By the time you recognize the weight in the air, the windows are already locked. Lena locked them gently, one by one, while Daniel held the key she handed him. And I, Eleanor Price, watched my world shrink to a single room. For during our lean years vanished one afternoon. I asked where it had gone. Lena smiled, her hand light on my shoulder. It looked too heavy, too sad. I donated it. Daniel stood by, rubbing his jaw, avoiding my eyes. The silence between us carried more weight than the missing chair. The house started to feel rearranged, as though someone had pressed reset on decades of memory. A picture frame that once held my wedding photo disappeared. A silver box with my father's watch could no longer be found. Lena offered explanations that sounded almost kind. It's safer packed away. It only made you cry. But the absence lingered like ghosts. Each vanished piece was not clutter. Each was a page from my story, torn without asking. One morning, I opened a kitchen drawer to find my address book missing. I asked. Lena's answer came smooth. You told me to throw it away. You said it was painful to see. I had no memory of saying that. For a moment, I wondered if grief had made me forget. I felt unmoored, doubting myself against her confident tone. It was as if my words were being rewritten in real time. And Daniel believed the edited version. Neighbors grew distant. My bridge partner stopped calling. I learned Lena had told them I needed space, that I was too fragile. At first, I thought it was kindness, but the silence around me thickened. Invitations dried up. Friends stopped knocking. My world shrank until the only voices in my home belonged to Daniel and Lena, and hers was the loudest. The living room no longer looked like mine. The rug Robert and I chose on our anniversary trip disappeared. The curtains were replaced without my consent. Lena said, "It's brighter, fresher." Yet I felt as though the house no longer knew me. And if the walls forgot me, how long before my son did too? Late one night, I walked barefoot to the study. My hands traced the outline of empty shelves where my books had been. Lena had said, "Too dusty, too sad." I realized the theft wasn't just of objects, but of identity. If you erase enough of a person's surroundings, you erase their confidence in belonging. Daniel still kissed my cheek. He still said, "Love you, Mom." But his loyalty bent easily under Lena's certainty. When I protested, he sighed. She's only trying to help. His words stung more than the emptiness of any chair. Help should heal. Them up with a frown that seemed rehearsed. Your property taxes are too high, Eleanor. These utilities are outrageous. Maybe it's time someone younger helps you. Her words dripped with sympathy, but her eyes flickered when she glanced at the life insurance statement. I remembered that flicker, like a match struck in the dark. She eased into the role of caretaker of my finances, asking gently if she could log into my accounts. You trust me, don't you? She whispered, sliding her hand over mine. Daniel nodded, his faith in her unshaken. I gave her the passwords. My heart said no, but my loneliness said yes. For weeks, I did not write a single check or balance a single ledger. She smiled, efficient, as if running a business that had quietly become hers. Then the bank called. Mrs. Price, unusual withdrawals have been flagged. My breath caught. Thousands gone. When I asked Lena, she produced receipts. New water heater, roof repairs. They looked official, but something was wrong. The ink was too fresh. The numbers too neat. Still, she tilted her head and said, "Don't you remember approving this?" I wanted to scream that I hadn't, but doubt slithered in. Was grief unraveling my memory? Daniel's silence spoke volumes. At the table, he clasped Lena's hand. "She's helping, Mom. You've been under so much strain." My son, who once defended me on the playground, now looked at me as though I were fragile glass. It felt as if I was losing him one signed check at a time. One night, I slipped into my office. Bank statements waited in neat piles, all organized by Lena. I opened one and felt ice in my chest. A large withdrawal bore my signature. Except the pressure, the curves were wrong. 35 years of bookkeeping trained my eyes to spot lies hidden in ink. I knew this was not my hand. The room spun, but clarity cut through. I was not forgetting. I was being forged. Isolation deepened. Friends stopped calling because Lena answered the phone saying I was resting. Mail vanished before it reached me. Conversations about my finances happened without me. The life I had built, brick by brick, was being dismantled silently under my roof. I lay awake that night. Lena's hand was faster. She pressed the receiver to her ear and whispered, "Hello, this is Eleanor Price." My breath froze. I sat at the edge of the bed listening to her mimic my voice with practiced pauses. "Yes, I'd like to transfer the funds. Yes, I authorize." Each word was a dagger, spoken in my name. The following morning, she handed me coffee with extra sugar the way Daniel never remembered. "Sleep well?" she asked casually, but her eyes scanned me as though measuring my awareness. I nodded, too stunned to speak. Later, I called the bank myself. The clerk hesitated before saying, "But Mrs. Price, you already called yesterday. You authorized the transfer." The world tilted. My hands shook as I realized my voice had been stolen. I sat at my desk, tracing the numbers on the statement. 40,000 gone in one sweep. My signature appeared at the bottom of the authorization slip. I knew the curve of my P, the slant of my E, yet this one leaned too heavily, like someone pressing too hard, eager to prove what wasn't true. A forgery lives in the weight of ink, and I saw it instantly. Daniel found me in the study, papers spread like fallen leaves. He frowned. "Mom, you're working yourself up. Lena said you've been confused lately. Maybe let her handle it." His words sliced deeper than the missing money. My own son doubted my grip on reality. I wanted to shout that I was not slipping, that I was being stripped. But my voice trembled, and trembling sounded too much like weakness. That night, I couldn't sleep. I slipped into the office with a tiny camera I had purchased long ago for home security. My hand steadied as I placed it between two books angled at the desk. I pressed record, whispering to myself, "If they want proof of confusion, I'll give them proof of theft." Days later, I returned to find the footage I dreaded yet needed. Lena rifling through drawers, her phone's flashlight catching papers. She practiced my signature on a notepad, strokes jerky at first, then smoother. She snapped photos of account numbers, her face calm, almost satisfied. Watching it, I felt sick, but also sharpened. The evidence was no longer just in my mind. Still, fear gnawed at me. If Lena discovered I was recording, she could turn Daniel further against me, accelerate her plan. My world had narrowed to a battlefield where every smile hid strategy. Tie their shoes? For months, grief had dulled that instinct. But the night I watched Lena's hand glide across paper in my handwriting, something inside me sharpened. The widow who wept had given way to the accountant who calculated. I pulled my old notebook from the closet, the one where I had once logged client appointments. I began a new column: withdrawals, dates, false repairs, forged slips. Every number, every lie, I recorded. I photographed statements and hid them in a cloud folder Lena didn't know existed. At dawn, I looked at the neat rows and felt a strange comfort. Numbers, unlike people, did not betray. The next day, Lena handed me a pile of bills, speaking with her usual sympathy. It's so confusing, isn't it? All these payments. Don't worry, I'll manage. I smiled, nodded, but inside I wrote the date and time, marking another entry. It was my quiet rebellion. Each kindness she offered was a transaction, and I was recording the cost. One afternoon, cash I kept in my desk drawer vanished. My pulse raced. That evening, I installed a hidden camera behind a stack of books in the study. The footage confirmed my fear. Lena slipping in, pulling open drawers, tucking money into her purse. She didn't even look nervous. She hummed softly, like she owned the space. I watched the video 3 times, memorizing every movement, until my stomach clenched with both fury and resolve. Daniel still kissed my cheek at dinner, still asked if I was eating enough. Yet when I mentioned the missing money, he shifted uncomfortably. Mom, you probably misplaced it. Lena says you've been forgetful. Forgetful. My son's word, borrowed from her mouth. I felt the sting of betrayal in its repetition. But instead of shouting, I swallowed it. Let them think I was fading. A fading woman gathers no suspicion while she collects proof. I reached out to Janet Morris, an old colleague turned forensic accountant. I disguised our meeting as a doctor's appointment. Janet listened carefully, eyes narrowing as she scanned the evidence I laid out. This isn't just theft, she said. It's a campaign. She's building a case to declare you incompetent. My throat tightened, but her certainty steadied me. We agreed. I would keep gathering until we had enough to strike. Nights became thought haunted me. How far would Lena go once she realized her careful script was unraveling? It was Daniel who first mentioned the word guardianship, his voice low, uncertain, as if tasting something sour. Mom, maybe it's time we considered some extra support. My stomach turned cold. Lena's eyes softened theatrically as she squeezed his arm. We only want what's best for her, she said. The words wrapped like silk, but the meaning cut like glass. Guardianship was not help. It was control. Soon, appointments appeared on the calendar that I had not made. Lena scheduled a consultation with a lawyer named Patterson, introduced as a family advocate. He spoke to me in the third person while I sat across from him. Mrs. Price needs protection, he said, as though I weren't in the room. I clenched my fists beneath the table, nails pressing half moons into my palms. The insult was deliberate, a rehearsal for the courtroom. Then came the doctor's appointment. Lena drove me herself, insisting on waiting inside, but Dr. Brennan, a young psychiatrist with steady eyes, refused her presence. Alone at last, I breathed like I hadn't in months. He asked about memory, numbers, decisions. I passed each test with ease. When he asked how I felt about my living situation, my voice cracked. Sometimes I wonder if I'm too dependent. His pen paused. I saw recognition in his eyes, not pity. Afterward, Lena pressed me for details. What did you say? Did he notice your confusion? I smiled faintly. He was thorough. The vagueness unsettled her. That night, I overheard whispers through thin walls. The evaluation might not go our way, she muttered. Daniel hesitated, but she drowned his doubt with urgency. We need this guardianship. Without it, she'll waste everything. I understood then that Lena's ambition reached beyond stolen checks. She wanted my house sold, my accounts emptied, my life packaged neatly under her supervision. I pictured myself in an assisted living facility, stripped of dignity. Daniel visiting only under her watchful eye. The thought burned. With Janet's help, I strengthened my defense. We froze what funds remained, gathered affidavits, and prepared exhibits. Still, the pressure grew heavier each day. Lena grew more controlling, with evidence locked safely away. Soon, in front of a judge, her play would unravel. Still, I felt the knife edge of fear. Would Daniel see me as clear-eyed or as the confused woman she had crafted? The answer would decide more than money. It would decide whether I still had a son. The morning of the hearing, Lena glowed with confidence. Her hair was pinned neatly, her dress modest, her voice dripping concern. Daniel trailed behind her, his face shadowed by doubt he tried to hide. I wore the navy suit Robert once said made me look indestructible. In my purse, the brass key pressed against my palm like a heartbeat. Inside the courtroom, familiar faces filled the benches. Neighbors, my bridge partner, even the mailman. Each had been coaxed by Lena's whispers into believing I was frail, forgetful, failing. Their testimony would be her chorus. My stomach tightened, but then I saw Janet sitting in the back, calm and steady. Her presence was a lifeline. The lawyer Patterson began first. His words painted me as a grieving widow unfit to manage her own affairs. He cited missed bills, erratic withdrawals, and paranoia. Every detail had just enough truth to sting, just enough lies to deceive. When Mrs. Hall testified she'd seen me wandering in my nightgown, I clenched my fists. It had never happened, but in that sterile chamber, her words sounded plausible. Then Lena took the stand. She wept on cue, her voice breaking. I've tried so hard to care for her, but she accuses me of stealing, of betrayal. It's heartbreaking. Daniel shifted uneasily, but he nodded when prompted. Betrayal tastes worst when it comes wrapped in your own child's silence. When the judge turned to me, I rose slowly, legs trembling but voice steady. Your Honor, I believe there are misunderstandings. Patterson half rose to object, but the judge gestured for silence. From my purse, I drew the envelope and stepped forward. My fingers didn't shake as I placed it before her. Inside lay statements marked with forged signatures, photographs of Lena rifling my desk, audio recordings of her voice calling the bank as me. The judge's eyes narrowed as she read. The gallery rustled. Daniel's head snapped toward Lena, but the woman who had built his childhood home with ledgers and resolve. His lips parted, a whisper escaping. Mom. The sound carried years of love and regret. The judge's voice rang out, cold and sharp. This is not protection. This is exploitation. She ordered the doors closed, the courtroom sealed. The story Lena had built was collapsing. But in that instant, with the evidence spread like shattered glass, one question remained. What would Lena do when cornered? The judge's command cracked through the air like thunder. Close the doors! The bailiff moved swiftly, and the sound of the latch echoed louder than any gavel. Lena stiffened beside her lawyer, her lips pressed into a thin, desperate line. For months, she had controlled the narrative, but now the room itself had turned against her. The audience leaned forward, the weight of silence pressing on every shoulder. Detective Martinez stepped from the back, his presence unexpected but unmistakable. He carried a folder. Evidence Janet had passed to the district attorney. Your Honor, he said, what Mrs. Price submitted aligns with our ongoing investigation into elder financial abuse. The words struck like stones. Daniel blinked rapidly, his gaze darting between me and Lena, as if seeing both of us for the first time. Lena's lawyer sputtered objections. This is circumstantial, an emotional fabrication. But the judge held up her hand. Sit down, Mr. Patterson. I have heard enough. She leafed through the documents again, her brow furrowed deeper with each page. When she looked up, her eyes no longer carried neutrality. They burned with restrained anger. Daniel rose slowly, his face pale. "Lena, is it true?" His voice cracked. Lena turned toward him, her expression shifting wildly. Pleading, angry, manipulative in quick succession. "She's confused, Daniel. She forged those herself. Don't you see? This is her paranoia." But her tone was shrill, unraveling the careful mask she had worn for so long. The photographs told the truth Lena couldn't smother. Her bent over my desk, pen in hand, copying my signature with a concentration that revealed guilt more than skill. The audio recording sealed it, her voice clear. "To believe." The courtroom gasped at the venom in her words. Even Daniel recoiled, seeing clearly the monster behind the mask. The judge's gavel struck once, sharp as a gunshot. "Mrs. Carter, you are under arrest for elder abuse, forgery, and fraud." The bailiff moved forward, handcuffs glinting in the fluorescent light. Lena jerked away, her eyes wild, searching for an exit that no longer existed. For the first time, fear twisted her features. The metal clasped around her wrists with a click that sounded final. Yet the tension in the room did not ease. Daniel dropped his head into his hands, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I stood tall, but inside, I trembled. Because even as Lena was led away, she turned once more. Her eyes locked on mine, cold, promising. And I understood. This battle was won. But had the war truly ended? The days after the courtroom felt surreal, as though I had been walking through a storm and finally stepped into sunlight. Yet the silence was not peace. It was a fragile echo of everything that had almost been stolen. Lena was gone, her trial awaiting, but the scars of her presence lingered in every corner of my home. The missing furniture, the altered routines, the hollow trust. They whispered reminders of how easily love could be twisted into chains. Daniel sat across from me one evening, his eyes red. He confessed in a voice raw with guilt, "Mom, I thought I was protecting you. I thought she loved you the way I did." I reached across the table and took his trembling hand. "You were protecting the woman you believed she was," I said softly. "That's not weakness, Daniel. That's the cruelty of her deception." His tears fell, but I saw in his expression the boy I had raised, the boy who once defended me against playground bullies. Resurfacing after years of silence, I returned to the community I had been exiled from. My bridge partners welcomed me back with tears and fierce embraces. Neighbors apologized, ashamed of believing lies told with perfect poise. Even the mailman smiled wide, saying, "Good to see you standing tall again, Mrs. Price." Their words stitched me back into the fabric of the life Lena had tried to unravel. Each embrace reminded me that isolation had not been chosen. It had been engineered. Months began with kindness. Each story I heard from others mirrored mine, and I realized my fight was no longer just for myself, but for every elder who feared speaking out. Survival had transformed into service. Daniel became my ally again, not as a caretaker, but as a son. He visited not to check on my competence, but to share dinners, laughter, and memories. We rebuilt, slowly, brick by brick, conversation by conversation. Trust, once shattered, did not come easily, but it grew in the soil of honesty. "I should have seen her sooner," he admitted. I shook my head. Deception thrives where love lives. That's why it hurts most. On the anniversary of Robert's death, I stood in the garden he had tended. The flowers bloomed wildly, untamed, just as he liked them. I whispered to the wind that I had survived, not because I was unbreakable, but because I had refused to stay broken. The lesson was carved deep. Dignity cannot be handed over without consent. Silence is not protection. And love, if unguarded, can be used as a weapon by those who covet rather than care. As I looked at Daniel, kneeling in the soil to plant new roses, I felt both sorrow and gratitude. Sorrow for the trust that had been poisoned. Gratitude for the bond that had survived. "We rebuild together," I told him, and he nodded, his smile quiet but true. Now I share my story not as a wound, but as a warning. Betrayal may wear the face of family, but truth, once spoken, is stronger. If you have ever doubted your own memory, your own worth, know this. Predators prey on silence. Speak. Gather proof. Stand tall. That is how survival becomes strength. And as for you, listening now, what would you have done in my place? Have you ever trusted someone only to learn their kindness was a mask? Share your thoughts, your stories, because every voice strengthens the wall against silence. If this story has touched you, consider subscribing, commenting, or sharing it with someone who may need to hear it. Family is our root, but roots need tending, or weeds will take hold. Until next time, may your home remain a place of trust, dignity, and unshakable love.